Good evening. Okay, we're going to try that one more time. Good evening. If everybody who is standing in the back, if you could please come forward and sit down, it would be greatly appreciated, because we're going to be here for about a half an hour. I want to welcome you to the 18th Global Conference for the International Leadership Association in the beautiful city of Atlanta, Georgia. All right. I'm Cynthia Cherry, the President and CEO of the International Leadership Association, and I just today have the distinct pleasure of doing really one thing. And that is first to welcome all of you, but second is to introduce the chairs. Well, not the chairs, but the chairs, both the ILA board chair and the conference chair. And then in turn, our keynote speaker is going to be introduced by Janet. But I want to start with introducing Catherine Tyler Scott, who is the ILA board chair. She has been a member of the ILA since really its inception, and has been the chair for the past 2 years. But prior to that, she served on the board for many years. Many years, and she was also in a leadership role in one of our member communities. So she has been engaged with the ILA for many years. She is a phenomenal board chair. She is also the partner in a company called KI ThoughtBridge that does work around leadership and change. She is very thoughtful, she's very dynamic, and what she is going to do is frame the conference. The ILA does a few things fairly unique. One is at this intersection of theory and practice. The other is at the end of the conference, we have a weaver, and she's one of our weavers to kind of tie everything together. Well, she's going to start us off by framing the conference. So she's going to be our framer and our weaver. Catherine.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It's my pleasure to be the framer and also the weaver, but also it's my greatest pleasure to work with Cynthia, the staff, and the wonderful board of ILA. You'll hear more about the work of the board on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. when we talk to you about all the things that have been happening over the past year and get to listen to you and your concerns. The whole conference, I know you've already looked at your booklets, is a great array of really wonderful and rich offerings. Already we've started with the pre-conferences. The theme itself is the most relevant one I can think of for these times, the dynamics of inclusive leadership. But what I really want to talk about is how we're going to start the conference. This march that we will soon be embarking upon, I think, is symbolic of so many others in the history of humankind. There are marches for many reasons: freedom, justice, equal rights, social change, and you can probably fill in a lot more. But as we walk with one another over to the center this evening, we will be doing so in memory of these other marches and in tribute, I think, to the significant role that leadership has always had in moving humankind forward toward a world, I think, that truly respects the dignity and the worth of every human being. As we enter what I believe is a regal building, we will soon encounter its sobering portrayal of hatred, oppression, fear, unbridled anger, and the isms, which are vestiges of which continue to plague us, unfortunately, today. But what we will also experience is the inspiring tenacity, persistence, and courage of those who refused to accept any type of bondage for anyone. I believe our consciousness will be raised, as well as our commitment to the values of inclusive leadership and to those values for which ILA stands. This symbolic act, this beginning of an incredible conference, is a powerful testament to who you are and who ILA is. I, on behalf of the board, welcome you to the conference and thank you for your participation and your support. And I look forward to marching over to the Civil Rights Museum with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Janet Reckman, who is this year's conference chair. But before I do that, I want to thank the J.W. Fanning Institute for Leadership Development at the University of Georgia, and in particular, Matt Bishop, the director, and the entire staff at the Institute, because it is through their sponsorship and their support of this conference that has really helped us to do that. And in fact, they are the sponsor for tonight's event. So I want to thank our very, very special sponsor, the Institute, tonight. Janet is a senior fellow at the Institute. And so her work there is very broad and encompassing in terms of the work that she does. But what I want to talk a little bit about is her work with the ILA, because she too has been involved for at least 15 years in various roles. She has been involved in terms of one of the member communities. She has always picked up to do whatever needs to be done in terms of that sense of servant leadership and really being willing to serve on behalf of her constituency, but also the membership as a whole. I think if there's a way that I would describe Janet, it is that she is a greeter and a connector. And she can rarely walk more than 5 feet before she stops and talks with somebody, but then as she's talking with somebody, she's pulling somebody else over and making sure that two people get to meet each other personally and to develop those relationships. So she does what we do so well in the ILA, which is all around relational development, a very, very important part of leadership. And so with that, I would like to have Janet please come forward and give you the context of Atlanta and this conference before she introduces Deborah. And as she's doing that, Catherine and I are going to exit because we want to be greeting you at the center when you finish the march over to the center. So thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Cynthia. I thought that was kind of busybody stuff I did. I'm glad to learn that it's leadership. That's good. Welcome, everybody, to Atlanta. I am so glad y'all are here. It is lovely. I hope you have a wonderful time. I really want to start with a quote by Max Dupree, which I like. He said, "The first responsibility of the leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. In between, the leader is a servant." It has been my pleasure to serve as chair of the 18th Global Conference, and that reality has become more defined, more clear with every passing day. It's continuing to get more clear even as we sit here, and each of you contribute to that reality. But I want to start in the spirit of Max Dupree with thanks to some of the folks who helped make this conference a dynamic and inclusive experience for those of us who teach, study, and practice leadership for the common good. I'm going to ask some people to stand up and keep standing. I'm a facilitator by nature, so I always like to see people doing stuff in front of me. So when I call your name or your role with the conference, please stand up for a second. Stand up and stay standing. First of all and foremost, I want to thank my colleague at J.W. Fanning Institute for Leadership Development, Emily Boness, who has served as logistic chair. She's already standing. She hasn't sat down since she got here. I also want to thank Dr. Matt Bishop, my boss at the J.W. Fanning Institute of Leadership Development, who supported Emily, me, and all the other Fanning people who've had a hand in this. So y'all stand up, please. Ryan Kesey, where are you, Ryan? Somewhere in the back. Ryan from Kennesaw State University has led the student volunteer effort. The ILA staff, especially Bridget Chisholm, Shelley Wilsey, and Cynthia Cherry. All right, there's conference committee members scattered throughout the room. You know your name because you saw it in the program. Stand up. And the student volunteers who are in the room, you can recognize them by their yellow hat, and all the other volunteers. We have student and non-student volunteers. And then there's sponsors. You know who you are. Stand up. So we got some people standing. Now let's thank them. Since it was announced last year, the theme, I've had a lot of time to reflect on what we mean by the dynamics of inclusive leadership. Just yesterday, Cynthia Cherry shared the observation that talking about the dynamics of inclusive leadership suggests that ILA is concerned with matter and antimatter. Kind of reminds you of Meg Wheatley's work in Leadership in the New Science. When she said this, I imagined opposites colliding to create a quivering, energetic whole, and that served as my starting image of this conference. I'm looking forward to that. My colleague, Rich McCline, who's here, teaches that there is a positive relationship between inclusive leadership and innovation. I agree, but the cynic in me would argue that that valence could change from positive to negative depending on the nature of the innovations that emerge. For example, U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump has mastered the innovations inherent in today's media-saturated environment to energize an inclusive and at the same time exclusive group of followers. That's all I have to say on that one. Finally, I've come to believe that a leader's personal experiences of being included and or excluded are directly related to his or her commitment to the struggle with the dynamics of inclusive leadership. Why does a leader choose inclusivity? It is a choice. How does he or she learn to navigate those dynamics? What does it take for a leader to thrive despite what Shakespeare had Hamlet call the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? My hope is that each of you will consider questions like these, as well as find new questions and maybe some answers at this conference. Then I also invite you to delve more deeply into these dynamics as we explore leadership in turbulent times at the 19th Global Conference in Brussels. So, I want to offer everyone a personal welcome to Atlanta. And I want to start with some shout-outs, particularly my niece, Leslie Godowski-Wolf, who I think is in the room somewhere. Leslie, stand up. I'm making everybody stand up, don't worry. She leads a leadership development program at University of Wisconsin. My cousin, Jennifer Zoffel, who coordinates a leadership development program for the Noyce Foundation, both at their first ILA. So that says the next generation is coming on strong, and I don't just mean my family. So, if you're a millennial or younger, stand up and stay standing. Millennial or younger, came of age around 2000. All right, stay there. And, wait, no, sit down. If you're a Gen Xer, everybody know who those are? Please stand up. Thank them. And I'm a boomer, so, I know sometimes we have a hard time standing, but let's stand up, boomers. Boomers and greatest generation, please stand up. So, and if you're somebody who doesn't know what your generation is, or don't care, you stand up now. Let's see. There you go. So, I want to welcome all of us generations, all us people from all over the world, to thank you for coming to Atlanta to learn more about the dynamics of inclusive leadership. So I'm going to take a minute now to introduce our speaker, Deborah Richardson, who's somebody I have known forever. In just a few minutes, Deborah and I and other yellow-hatted people and ILA board members will lead a walk to the Center for Civil or Human Rights, and Human Rights, and there will also be a bus available, so you'll be able to, as you leave here, there'll be directions on how to do that. It's about a 0.6 of a mile walk, all downhill going, and there will be buses available coming back. The center has been a powerful partner in planning this year's conference, in large part because the theme, the dynamics of inclusive leadership, speaks directly to their mission and vision for equity and positive social change. The center's director, Derek Kayunga, was called away unexpectedly and could not be with us tonight. And so while I'm sorry he's not here, I'm double, triple, quadruple delighted that Deborah is. She is the center's executive vice president and served shortly before as interim director of the center. A native Atlantan who grew up 4 doors down from the family of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Deborah has deep roots in the city and in her life's work of advancing human and civil rights. Prior to joining the center in 2011, she served as Chief Program Officer for the Women's Funding Network, the CEO of the Atlanta Women's Foundation, Director of Program Development for Fulton County Juvenile Court, Founding Executive Director of Juvenile Justice Fund, and Managing Director of the National Black Arts Festival. Obviously not all simultaneously, but in sequence. Deborah has received many honors for her advocacy, among them the Lives of Commitment Award from Auburn Theological Seminary, the Big Voice Award from Voices for Georgia's Children, and the Community Service Award from Spelman College Board of Trustees. She's a nationally recognized leader on social justice for women and girls and ending child sex trafficking. She has her master's in leadership from St. Mary College in California. I know she has some classmates here because I've seen her hug them. And she is a doctoral candidate, ABD, right? She is ABD at Union Institute and University. And not least, she is a member of the advisory board of the J.W. Fanning Institute for Leadership Development. So, there. As I tried to recall how I first connected with Deborah, I had yet another aha about the dynamics of inclusive leadership. I simply could not remember when or how we met. When I asked Deborah, she couldn't remember either. Yet we know, love, and trust each other as sisters in struggle. That's a dynamic of inclusive leadership that we often forget to mention. The power of partnerships forged over time, the social capital assets we build and invest as we work to create positive social change. Deborah, thank you for your friendship, your partnership, and your leadership, and welcome to the 18th Global Conference of International Leadership.
Thank you, Janet. And if you all are wondering how I got transformed from a 6'2" male with a Ugandan accent, it just shows you the power of leadership, right? Janet, thank you very much for the introduction, because I do believe my social location as a Black woman raised in the South, particularly in Atlanta, has informed my life's journey, as it does many of you in this room. Janet mentioned I lived 4 doors up the street from Dr. King's parents, Daddy and Mrs. King. But as important to that, I lived in a community called Collier Heights. It's the only Black community in the United States that's on the National Historical Register. The reason is because it was the first community that was built by African Americans for African Americans. So in addition to being on the same, being neighbors with the Kings, across the street from me was Donna Hollowell, who was the attorney for the NAACP that successfully argued for the integration of the University of Georgia. So around me, every single day where people, including my parents, were very much engaged in a hands-on way in the movement in the 50s and 60s to change the face of this country. And because of that, I understood and began to imbue those values of leadership for social justice. Being in Atlanta is an amazing case study on inclusive leadership. And I want to give you a brief historical perspective on that. It starts 150 years ago because Atlanta is the only city in this country where you have 5 historical black colleges: Morehouse College, Spelman College, Clark Atlanta University, Morris Brown College, and Interdenominational Theological Seminar. So for 150 years, these 5 black institutions have generated more and hundreds and thousands of blacks who were educated, but they were not just educated with a college degree, but with a deep sense that they needed to use their privilege not only to do well, but to do good. And because of that huge influx and continuation of blacks who were educated, owned their own homes, owned their own businesses, Atlanta became the think tank of the American Civil Rights Movement. Dr. King, as many of you know, was born here, grew up here, was educated at Morehouse College. And as the movement began to galvanize, Atlanta became that place where the major institutions were located. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was begun and really thought through by Ella Baker and joined in with Dr. King's and others, was situated here. When the young people in the country got really agitated about the slowness of social change, the Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee was located here. So all of this energy was taking place as people were planning and gathering and then planning out across the South to implement these strategies. Atlanta's second aspect as a case study for inclusive leadership was led by the business community. Unlike a lot of businesses in the South, the business community here felt that racial agitation, racial seclusion would not in any way interrupt business. That's a pretty capitalistic thought, right? And so as a result of that, the business community was willing to negotiate to bring Atlanta to meet the demands of the blacks, particularly the students. Those of you who came to the pre-con at the center this morning had the privilege of meeting some of the leaders of the Atlanta student movement. And they, unlike another cities where they were really focused on different kinds of actions, in Atlanta, their main leverage was the business community, and in terms of an economic boycott. That moderation in business really really came to a head, if you will, in 1964, when Dr. King won the Nobel Prize. At that time, he was the youngest to ever win that prize, and 2, he was the first Georgian. So the business community and the political leadership came together and says, you know, we need to hold the first integrated dinner in the city to honor Dr. King. Whereas the leadership was behind it, there were others who were really like temperate. Like that's, you know, we've done a lot of concessions in Atlanta, but now you're asking us to go too far. And after it seemed that there was going to be a very weak response to that dinner, the mayor, the Coca-Cola Company CEO and board chair convened the white business community and gave them a mandate. And that mandate from the chair of the Coca-Cola Company was, the Coca-Cola Company does not need Atlanta. You need to make a decision if Atlanta wants the Coca-Cola Company. And from that mandate, that dinner sold out in 2 hours. And so you talk about this rich history of inclusive leadership among the education and inspiration of the black community, among the corporation and support of the white moderate business community. All of that came together 14 years ago when Atlanta elected its first female mayor. And this is a whole other leadership journey about how women really get things done, but that's another talk. So on two different occasions, activists who were engaged in the movement, one of which was Ambassador Young, who I see is going to be doing a program with his daughter Andrea on Thursday, and another activist came to Mayor Franklin on two different occasions and said there needs to be a place in Atlanta that talks about our role as a think tank of the movement. And she agreed. She organized a committee to do a feasibility study, if this was something that could really be pulled off. And once you start a committee, you are almost sure to kill a good idea, right? But there was something, a catalyst that really got that committee out of this cycle of meeting and discussing, and that was when the King family placed the personal papers of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on auction in Sotheby's. The citizens of Atlanta strongly felt that those papers needed to come back to Atlanta. They did not want them put in the hands of a private collector or even